Rachel Cheninoff, and welcome back to Sure Things. Today's show's yet a bit different format, so I guess you just have to stay tuned and see all the changes we make. But today I'm very excited about because I have wanted since the beginning to do a show that has a segment regarding cooking. And so today I'm very happy to say that's what's going on today. I'd like to welcome my guest for today, Chef Jenn Magrey. Hi, Jenn. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you tonight?
Good, thank you. I've had the pleasure to take a few cooking classes with Chef Jenn as I work on not only my cooking skills, we had a class also on knife skills as well. They were very great classes. I have to say that my application at home, I could use still some work, but anyway. So Chef Jenn, welcome. Could we start by having you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, my love of cooking, I think, began for the moment I could eat. I know it sounds funny, but my mom was someone who, as I was growing up, always had me next to her. I always had one of those like 2-level stools, and I could lick the spoon and I could ask questions. And she was very good at explaining, and we always grocery shop together. And, you know, my siblings and I, we are all food lovers. And my mom owned a restaurant until I was 8. So food is in my blood. So naturally, I just, the three of us, just my sister and my brother and I, we just became foodies from the get-go. And then for many years, I had different jobs and what have you. And then when I was 27, I decided I love cooking so much, I want to pursue a cooking career. And I happened to go to a high-end establishment in Thompson, Connecticut, and I could smell something cooking when I walked through the door. And the person waiting on me at the moment asked me if I'd like to go talk to the chef to see if what was cooking was really what I could smell, which was morel mushrooms, which have an earthy kind of scent to them. And we go about 6 rooms down into this big mansion, and the chef is in there, and he said, yeah, it's what I'm cooking. So we talked, the chef and I, for about 3 hours, and he said, you should be working in this industry. You know more than people that went to school. So I just kind of threw that off, like, yeah, whatever. And he called me 2 days later, and he said, I'm serious, you need to be working with me. So this guy took me under his wing, and I worked there for going on like maybe 4 years, and I was very dedicated to the place. I learned everything I could possibly learn, and he took me under his wing, like I said, and I became a chef. And I use that word only since people started calling me chef. I never called myself a chef until other chefs called me a chef. And I love to create, I love to learn. I teach myself something new in the culinary world every single day. And here I am, 54. I was 27, so we can say half my life ago, I took this journey.
Wow, and you say half your life ago, but as you said in the beginning, it's been your entire life. Where was your mom's Where was your mom's restaurant, and what kind of restaurant was that?
It was in a tiny little town in Connecticut called Moose Up, Connecticut, and it was a little tiny restaurant that was on a lake, and they served everything from fish and chips and to spaghetti to, you know, you name it. And my mom still has the flip pad where I used to write as a waitress when I was 4 years old, going table to table, taking the orders and what have you. So it's in my blood from day one to be in a restaurant or be in some sort of food setting.
That is a great story. I love that story, that it just goes way back. Was that ever an inspiration for you to open up your own business as far as a restaurant?
Well, I've never really wanted to open a restaurant. Restaurant is very different than private chef work or personal chef work, which is what I do now. But I did catering for about 20 years. And that was in Providence, Rhode Island. I did some catering here in Connecticut and a few different places. I do a lot of small dinner parties in people's homes. I do a lot more of the private chef work. And that's what I prefer because there's so much more intimacy in a restaurant. A restaurant to me, you know, you have your menu items, you learn them really well, and you have your line cooks, and the food goes out and you don't see the people, you don't hear their response. I'd rather be in a setting where people are asking you questions and they want to know where you got your food or where it's sourced from or how you came about the recipes. And that's why I loved catering too, because it was for weddings or birthday parties. An event always happens. So you might as well be part of it. And that's why with catering, I always felt like I was part of the event, not just someone that is dropping off food. I always loved that feeling of creating recipes with the client and making it personal and just for them.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, after taking several of your classes, I can definitely, your passion comes through, which is wonderful. So again, I appreciate you being here today. What are you going to walk us through the recipes for today? What are we making?
Sure. Well, it's soup weather. To me, soup weather is year round because I love soup all year. But when it's cold like this and it's, the winter time here in New England, I love to have soup. So there's so many kinds of soup out there, but my favorite soup, like a lot of people, is tomato soup. And we all grew up with that little red and white can and, add half milk, half water. If you were fancy, you added the milk. But I'm making a homemade 30-minute creamy tomato soup, which literally only takes 30 minutes. And it's just so much tastier. And you make enough for a dinner and definitely a lunch for another day for like 4 people. So it's quality ingredients that I like to use. And I'm just going to review the menu, the recipe with you.
Thank you.
And it's some olive oil, some onions, some carrot, some garlic. We have some San Marzano tomatoes. Now, San Marzano tomatoes are an Italian tomato from the San Marzano region. And what makes them so good is that they're hearty, meaty, and they're not full of seeds. So they have a lot of flavor, and they don't have a lot of that mealiness. If you buy a can of San Marzano and open it next to a can of not San Marzano, you will definitely see the difference of thickness, consistency. Even the mouthfeel is different, and the acidity is a lot different. Usually you don't need to use a lot of sugar with San Marzano because they're so sweet. And then some vegetable broth, and I like to add a little honey instead of regular sugar in case those tomatoes are too acidic. And then at the end you can add heavy cream, or like I'm going to do today is use a plant-based milk. I'm using oat milk today because a lot of people have moved away from dairy. I love a lot of dairy products, so I'm not negative against dairy, but I love using oat milk or almond milk in some of my soups because it makes it just as creamy and just as flavorful, but without the dairy and the fat. And what I did, I'm going to show you, is I made a beautiful tomato soup today. And all that I need to do at the end is add that cream and use an immersion blender or a regular blender and make it nice and smooth and creamy. Okay, it's a heavy pan.
So Jen, you actually made that already. So you made that.
Yes, I made that already. And like I said, it has the the onions, the carrot. The carrot will bring sweetness to it, and it brings body to it also. And then the onion, of course, for flavor, and the garlic for flavor. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the immersion blender now and show you how easy it is. I put this together 25 minutes ago, so it will be ready for 6 o'clock. 1 second, please.
Oh, that sounds great.
I'm sorry.
No, this is great because it shows us that tool. I actually got one year for Christmas, and I have used it for different soups. I do wonder too, because I noticed on the next recipe you're going to talk about freezing it, but can you freeze a tomato soup with a cream base as well?
I would not add the cream, but at this stage you can. Before you add any milk products or cream or non-dairy products, you'd want to freeze it before then because that can separate. I know the real dairy will separate. It won't taste bad, but it will just separate and kind of give it that almost broken look to it. So I'm going to make noise for about 2 seconds now. Hope it's not too bad. All right, Nancy, why am I not doing this? Oh, it's back here. Which one is it? The top. Oh.
No, not in the handle.
Oh, there it is. I'm sorry.
Oh,
It's different than mine. This one doesn't make that much noise, which is good. So I'm actually I'm using the immersion blender, and it's breaking up all the tomatoes and the carrots, and everything will be really, really smooth. This is great to make on, like, say, a Friday night, and then you can have it for Saturday or Sunday for your leftovers to have for lunch with grilled cheese. We all love the grilled cheese and tomato soup. That's a perfect combination. I wonder who came up with that. I don't know.
Jen, can I ask you too, because if I didn't have an immersion blender though, could I use a regular blender, or is with hot food, do you have an issue with that?
Yes, always with a regular blender, with anything is hot like this, you must keep part of the lid ajar, because if not, it becomes a bomb, basically.
Okay.
Because all that gets trapped up in the, under the cover. It really just heat wants to escape, and it will explode on you. So the little bit that I've done so far has already made the soup nice and creamy. And then I'm just going to stir in my little bit of milk here. And I like to stir as I'm pouring it in. And that just helps it blend better instead of it sitting on top, and then it takes a little bit harder to blend. Nice and smooth. And that's it. We have a beautiful tomato soup. I'm gonna grab my ladle so you can see this. I'm gonna go right back into my little cup here, and you're gonna see how beautiful this creamy soup is.
That looks wonderful.
It's wonderful.
I noticed on the recipe, it doesn't say how many servings. Would you say that this recipe is a serving for 4?
This is a 1 cup, and it would probably do about 8 people for 1 cup to have like a cup. But if you want to have a big bowl of soup, probably 4 people.
4 people. And I did want to let the viewers know that both the recipes that Chef Jenn is going over today will be posted on the Valley Shore Community TV website along with the show. So you can find the recipes there to enjoy.
And then this is another thing I wanted to show you is I have some basil here, and I stacked them in each individual leaf. And I'm just going to roll them into like a little cigar and make little tiny minced pieces. They're called chiffonade, which it makes it nice, light and fluffy pieces. So they're not too strong in your mouth, so they have a nice small bite. And then you could garnish your soup with that, and it makes a beautiful garnish for your tomato soup. And if you wanted to, you could also take this soup and add things like rice or orzo, or even some shredded chicken and farro and some spinach, or add some tortellini. You could stretch this soup and make it something other than just tomato soup. It could act as a base for your next soup. So if one day you want it as tomato soup, the next day you might be able to add a little bit more broth, add some, orzo or tortellini, or even some white beans and some chopped up fresh spinach, and it would make it a fantastic second soup that is just from this base.
That's a great
And
idea.
I even put that in the recipe too.
Yeah, those are great ideas to really stretch it and have something totally different the next day is great. Using that as a base. Excellent.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're going on to, what is your next project?
The next one is a roasted vegetable broth. Around the holidays, people roast turkeys or chickens or goose or ducks or any type of poultry. Oh, they have, their beef with their prime ribs or their tenderloins. But a lot of people make broths with those bone broth, make a bone broth. But not a lot of people roast vegetables to make a broth. But we have a lot of plant-based people. In the past 5 to 8 years or so, plant-based diets have really increased a lot. And it's very important for nutrition and for using up all your scraps. You can actually start a bag in your freezer. So if you peel carrots, throw your peels into that bag. If you, your ends of your celery that you might not use and you might throw away because they're not pretty looking, throw those in your freezer. It doesn't matter if they get frozen. It's just for the use of the vegetable. So if you could just start a scrap bag in your freezer for this broth, it works out excellent. But for today, I made a fresh broth with fresh veggies, with carrots, celery, Roma tomatoes, or any tomato. I just like Roma because they're a smaller, less seedy kind of tomato. White turnips, onions, leeks, mushrooms, garlic, and some fresh thyme, and then some olive oil, black pepper, and salt, and we roast those in the oven. And by roasting them, the natural oils will come out of the actual vegetables and create a lot more flavor just by roasting. The caramelization that happens with vegetables when you roast them brings the flavor elevation to another level. So I did that earlier. I roasted the veggies, and then I put them in my pot here, as you can see. I have all the veggies in here. And I like to use, this is another little trick, and I just showed people the other night during the Zoom cooking classes, because we do Zoom cooking classes here also, which is great. We have like 4 families on 4 different screens, and we all talk, and we all have the same ingredients, and I talk and teach them in their own homes. So this is one of the things I showed them the other night, is use a pasta pan, because everything can lift right out. Instead of having to strain it, you just lift it right out. So that's with a bone broth, or if you're making chicken stock, you can do that with any of your broths, and use a perforated pan, and all that goodness is left in the pan, and now you have this beautiful broth.
That's a great idea. That makes a lot of sense too. I was thinking for a fish stock. If you
you could do it for any stock.
Yeah.
Anything that you want strained would work in here.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm just gonna, this beautiful veggies right here. Her chickens are gonna love this tomorrow.
Those are beautiful.
Yeah, that, like I said, her chickens are gonna love this tomorrow. So the few things you want to know about a veggie broth also is not to use cruciferous vegetables like your broccoli and your Brussels sprouts and your cauliflower, because if you roast those and then put those in your stock, it'll all taste really funky, kind of. It'll give a little bit of too much of a cabbage flavor to your overall broth. So you want to leave those out when you roast vegetables for broth. Also with potatoes, you don't want to put potatoes when you're making a stock or a broth, because that makes it cloudy. It'll make any broth cloudy. Okay. So, and if you wanted to take this to another level, you could simmer this down really a long time, and then clarify it with some eggshells, and that would kind of make an aspic, like a vegetable aspic. But that's going to another level of culinary skills. But this is how you would start, right here. And this smells so good.
Oh, I can.
And you could freeze this in little pints or half pints or even ice cube trays. And if you want to add something to a sauce that you're making, or to, another sauce that you might be making, or stock, you could add some of this to it, just to bring that vegetable flavor up. So if you made your chicken stock, you could add some of your vegetable broth that you just made and keep it in your freezer, and it's accessible. It's super, it smells.
I bet it does. And I was wondering, because I noticed that on the recipe, that you were roasting those vegetables, even the tomatoes, for an hour in 400 degrees. And they still, they don't get overdone that way. They're still good.
There's enough moisture in the vegetables. You keep them it's like a random chunk too. You don't want to cut them up too small. If you notice, I just wrote, cut into chunks or cut in half. They're kept quite big. So they're not cut, if they're cut too small, they might burn in some areas, especially the corners. But you keep everything fairly big. And, there's so much water content in vegetables that it doesn't, some parts brown, but that's okay, because that browning is what brings flavor. Yeah. That caramelization will bring flavor. The sugar in any vegetable or fruit or meat or anything is what causes the browning in all of your foods, and that's what brings flavor. That's why we love the browning of bread, because the sugars in the bread are browning. That's the flavor you want, is the roasting flavor. Definitely. And if you also notice on the, if you look down at your recipe, if you have it there, you don't necessarily have to peel things. You can keep the peels on your vegetables. Brings more nutrition. It can bring more flavor. It brings more body to the whole stock.
Can I ask another, it might be an obvious question for those viewers that are cooks out there as well. That's a vegetable stock that you just made.
Yes.
Is that a lot different than if I was making a vegetable soup, or would I just keep those
this is what you could
in?
use as your base for your vegetable soup. This would definitely be something that you could use as your base.
As your base, and then what I cook.
Yeah, well, this would be the broth that you would use. You could add anything to this. Just like I mentioned with the tomato soup, you could add any grains. You could make a lentil soup with this. You could make, a farro soup with, Italian vegetables with this. It could be your vegetable broth go-to. So if you want to add a vegetable broth base to any of your soups, this would be something you could do or use. This is what you would want to use. So if you have the time, just roast some vegetables. And like I said, start with the scraps. I was brought up, we always had a scrap bag in our freezer, because my mom would make vegetable soup or make the broth. And it used to look funny, because you had a Ziploc bag of vegetable peels, and then you couldn't believe that she was going to make something out of it, but she always did, and she always would roast them first, and that's what we came up with is this.
That's wonderful. And that goes back to even your first recipe when I think about all the things you can add to that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
to use that as a base. And I did want to talk, that sounds great. If we're done with that recipe, I want to talk a bit about the weekend kitchen and your
Sure.
classes, because you mentioned that. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, we do. I started with Nancy here at the Weekend Kitchen in Essex. In 2014, I walked into her store with my chef coat on, forgetting that I had my chef coat on because in the morning it was warm and in the afternoon it was cold. So when I left my job that day, I didn't have a coat. So I left my coat on and she said, "Hey, chef." And I didn't know how she knew I was a chef. And she pointed to my shirt, she pointed to my jacket. And I was like, oh, I totally forgot that I had that on. And we got talking and she asked me if I taught cooking classes and I said yes. But at the time, the majority of cooking classes that I taught were between 12 and 18-year-olds because I taught at a couple camps. They would have me come in every day from Monday through Thursday for 4 days a week. I would teach at a camp, 12 to 18-year-olds, usually about 30 students a day. And that was the majority of my cooking class experience or teaching experience. But I knew I could handle adults, and I did it a few times at different rec centers or community centers. So we just collaborated together, and I came here and we started teaching classes. And we were hoping back in 2014 to get 6 people. Now we're doing 6 classes a month. So there's a big difference to hoping you could fill one class 6 years ago or 7 years ago to now doing classes that we have to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're booked that Saturday. Could we try another Saturday?" We now do them on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. And now during this fall and with COVID, we started doing outside classes during nicer weather where people still had to wear a mask and they had their own individual tables. We did grilling classes this fall. We didn't come into the kitchen, only one person would, and that would be Nancy, and she would help, by bringing stuff to the ovens or what have you. But we had induction burners outside, grilling equipment outside. Everybody still had a ball. So it can be done even with COVID. We can do this. Like I said, through Zoom meetings now, or in the spring, we're going to start up with the outside classes.
Yeah.
But we do families for reunions, for birthday parties, for we've done class reunions, we've done girlfriends reunions, we do lots of bachelorette parties because we start at 6:30 in the evening and they're done by 10, so they can still go out and do their partying and drinking after and what have you. But they have their big meal here, they still have fun together, and they're learning something. And, it starts a great weekend for these bachelorette parties.
And
It's so many different ways that you can do it. We can do a million different classes.
As I had said, I have done a few in Nancy's kitchen there. And I just wanted to mention Nancy does own the Weekend Kitchen.
She is the owner of the Weekend Kitchen in downtown Essex,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful store that sells anything from vintage to things from, more contemporary. You can find anything that you want. I have to walk through her store 5 times when I go there in that same visit because I see something new at every corner.
Yeah.
The way she decorates and displays everything is just so out of this world. It's just a place that you want to visit every time you come to Essex.
It is. And then for Nancy to open her home for the cooking classes and
This was her main goal. This was her goal, building this kitchen. And as you can tell, it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous kitchen. Everything is top notch, high end. All the food that she purchases from her meat provisions all the way to her vegetables, she sources through all the local farmers and dairies, and she has her own eggs out back. So everything you get here is going to be quality.
It is amazing. It's an amazing experience. I've done there in the kitchen, and I think it was maybe that was spring or summer where we did one outside. It was the paella making, and it was all outside for COVID. So that was great. Yeah. That was great as well. But I've done the Christmas cookie one and other ones, and I think you're right. That sense of community you get when you're all together and you're working on it, and it's certainly we learn so much going through the classes. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, from knife
Learning a
handling
little-
to,
It's about learning a little, but like the old, there's an old saying about breaking bread together creates friendships. Everybody gathers in the kitchen. Every time there's a party or a gathering of any sort, the first thing people say is, what are you going to bring? There's going to be a food item, a drink item, something that you remember so-and-so's deviled eggs, or, do you remember when that person brought, I always remember the food. Someone could ask me how someone's wedding was, and I'll tell them about the food first thing. So kitchens will always bring people together wherever you are.
well, Chef Jenn, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And if somebody wanted to know more about the cooking classes or to get in touch with you, how would they go about that?
Well, you could contact the Weekend Kitchen in Essex, Connecticut.
Yeah.
It's available on a website,
Okay,
and
good.
it's also on Facebook and Instagram.
All right.
And then if you needed to find me, Chef Jenn, I have my own business called Chef Jenn Teaches Food, and that's on Facebook also. And Jenn is with 2 N's. Just to
Right,
let you know.
and I have to go over the spelling of your name too, because I think it was misspelled on the prompter. It's Magrey,
Oh.
Magrey.
Actually, Magrey.
Right. Okay.
Magrey.
Magrey.
Yeah.
Okay. So I
Yes.
just want to make sure that's clear. Well, I want to thank you again and again to let our viewers know that the recipes that Chef Jenn gave us today will be available on the website. So thank you, Jenn. Hope to see you again soon. And thank you
Yeah.
all for tuning in today. Until next time, stay safe.
Yes, thank you.